Hey there, truth seekers. I'm Larry Litton, your guide through the maze of modern politics and power dynamics on liberty, leadership, and lies. Each episode will challenge the narratives, expose the lies, and celebrate the leaders who champion true liberty. Get ready to question, learn, and maybe even change your mind. So let's dive into the truth together. Good solo Monday morning, ladies and gentlemen. Before I start with the regular program, I want to take a moment here to recognize and remember a great Tennessean that recently passed away, former Tennessee State Senator Frank Nicely. First, I must tell you folks that when I received the news of this passing last Thursday, it almost floored me. Frank was truly a gentleman statesman that served his constituents in the great state of Tennessee very well and for many years. He started off in the Tennessee House for 2 separate terms and then finally in the Tennessee Senate. I was extremely privileged to have some great conversations with him. And in fact, he was a guest on this program a little more than 2 years ago. I also got to share the stage with him during a candidate forum last year during the primary election cycle. It was one of the many times that the other guy didn't attend. In fact, both Frank's and my opponent didn't show up for that debate. There are multiple posts across many social media platforms from people in the General Assembly and in Tennessee government that have expressed their condolences as is proper. However, there are many people sharing posts that are disingenuous at best. Some of the same people that worked feverishly and backed by out-of-state donors and interests that are shedding crocodile tears at the news of Frank's passing. Just like you cannot dislike the media enough when they do something like this, you cannot dislike the establishment transpublicans enough with their fakeness. At least my former opponent, who was a constituent of Frank's for many years, has not publicly expressed his condolences. You have to admire his consistency in that regard, folks. It is and always will be all about Fred, which means it's all about the Good Old Boy Network in Sevier County. They are some of the same groups of people that worked to defeat Frank in the last primary election. People like Jack Parton and Michael McCroskey. But I digress. I don't want this to be about them, but about the humble and conservative servant leader that Frank Nicely was. A good man that will no longer be fighting alongside us in the arena, but has gone on to his heavenly reward. Again, please join me in lifting up his family in our prayers as they deal with their loss. With that, let's take a stand in the arena together again this week, folks, as we discuss the lies surrounding the recent SCOTUS decision, even though there is a good outcome, as well as the lies being spread about a bunch of people that want to drag us into war. Oh, and we'll discuss a term being used quite frequently in the media, given events in Minnesota and elsewhere, and that term is political violence. So let's roll. Welcome to Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, the podcast where we unravel the complex web of politics, power, and deception. Each week, we dive into the stories behind the headlines, exploring how liberty is eroded and the selfishness of our political leaders, as well as the lies that shape our world. Join us as we dissect the truth from fiction by examining the tactics used by the new aristocracy, the political class, at the local, state, and national levels of government as we dare to challenge the status quo. Get ready for thought-provoking discussions, exclusive interviews, and a journey into the heart of what really drives our society. Liberty, Leadership, and Lies, where your understanding of the world begins to change. Tune in every Monday morning and prepare to see beyond the veil. Before we get started, I want to apologize in advance if I seem to be a bit rusty in my return to a first solo show since the end of March. As you can probably tell, I'm recording this show from a hotel room in Wyoming, specifically Gillette, Wyoming right now. I've been here for 2 weeks now and have really enjoyed the weather. I did take advantage of it and did some power walking on some paths in a couple of the parks in the area. Power walking is all I can muster with my bum knee. The torn meniscus makes anything faster than a power walk painful, especially if there are any hills involved. I will be making my way down to Riverton, Wyoming later this morning to start coaching with the crews working in that area. I don't know if you could tell from this lighting or not, but I've been getting a lot of sun. Getting the lighting right in these hotel rooms is a bit tricky. But even with regular application of my SPF 100 sunscreen lotion, I apparently still get sunburned a bit. It is that sensitive Irish skin, I guess. Spending years underwater on submarines probably didn't help either. Anyway, please bear with me as I get back in the groove of this solo performance. Also, before we get into the main topic of this week's show, let's talk a bit about the situation in the Middle East right now. As I was putting this week's show together earlier, I did not think that President Trump would actually involve the United States directly in this conflict with Iran. If you know me, you know that I don't watch a lot of news. Everything you see on television is biased one way or another. I only scan or search for news articles from multiple websites for the topics I will be discussing during the week's show. I've been following this situation somewhat and was pleased, up until Saturday evening, that President Trump had shown some restraint up until that point. I am on the side of the no war conservative MAGA crowd, and I believe that position is constitutional. Although I must say that I'm surprised by the left on them taking the position of being anti-war, but that's probably because they don't want to see Israel successfully eliminate the threat from their terrorist, demon, savage regime pals that is in charge over there in Persia. Up until Saturday midday, there were unconfirmed reports about our nation's stealthy flying Doritos making their way across the Pacific, but nothing definitive. The reports, even though unconfirmed at the time, are problematic for me as well. Our nation's operational security is completely crap, it seems. If randos on X and other social media sites are making posts about the movements of our strategic national security assets, there is a problem. Now, about the B-2 or Flying Dorito, those planes can deliver some serious ordnance, which we all found out, without fear of detection, but they do not carry near the payload that the B-1, or as my Air Force buddies call it, the Bone, can carry. Same thing for the B-52s. Both the Bone and the B-52 carry significantly larger payloads, nearly twice the amount of ordnance, but they do not have the stealth technology that allows the B-2 to get in, put some warheads on foreheads, and get out undetected. But seeing how the Israeli Air Force has nearly completely decimated Iran's air defense capabilities, I was thinking all this talk and speculation about sending B-2s overseas was merely a psyop. After all, how can rando pages know about the movement of our stealth planes? I also believe that all that talking and postings were meant to bring the mullahs in Iran to the table by the mere threat of the skies over Iran looking like they're missing some pixels while the largest bunker busting ordnance in the world is dropped on their supposedly secure nuclear sites. Later reporting, though, has alleviated some of my concerns about the operational security of this plan, which I may get to here in a bit. But apparently, my earlier speculation on the situation was completely wrong, and we, meaning the United States, have now become actively involved in yet another undeclared war in the Middle East. Now, how did the last couple of those regime change conflicts in the Middle East work out for us? Nothing good can come from us being more involved than we already were. My position was that we should have just kept arming the Israelis and let them handle the existential threat to their nation. Now, Iran is a threat to us, but not an existential threat. That would have been the win-win situation for the United States. Just prior to putting the show together, I was talking to my bride about the posts on X that I was seeing, along with some communications with people that I know that were discussing the potential U.S. bombing of Iran, and was going to go with that line of thinking on this week's show. You know who does watch the news a bit, or a lot, and who is very close to me? Well, that would be my mother. And I was sitting here in the hotel room going through my notes and arranging this episode. I get the phone call from her at 6:24 p.m. my time Saturday evening, which meant it was 8:24 p.m. her time. It's kind of late for her. She called me up to let me know that President Trump had just posted on True Social about bombing Iran. So it was back to the drawing board and putting together different notes for the show. It required some more research too, as well as devoting more time to Iran and national politics than is the norm for this Tennessee centric podcast. But international conflict that involves the United States directly impacts us here in Tennessee, as we will see in the coming days, weeks, and months. Everything from rising gas prices to parents and spouses once again worrying about their loved ones being sent to get seriously maimed or killed in a Middle Eastern war. So, in doing some research on different social media sites and news sites, I've also seen an unconfirmed report about some possible ground assault ongoing against guards at the Fordo fuel enrichment plant in central Iran. Those reports were coming out around the same time as our bombs were reaching their targets in Iran, so I don't know what to make of it. I'm pretty sure that Israel is not at the point of a land invasion in Iran, and I sure do hope that our forces have not been committed to the battlefield over there. There was also a report about an earthquake around the same time as the bombing, and I really don't know what to make of that. Now, for all those people that will come out now and say that I'm turning on Trump and that now that he has dropped bombs in Iran, of course you would, because that suits your purpose. One talking head on a major cable news show even had the audacity to come out and say that if anyone here in the United States is against what President Trump just did, that just means that those people are for the demon savage regime in charge in Tehran. Now, for the long-time listeners of this program, you know that I've been one of the most ardent supporters of President Trump, and that is because of his America First policies, positions, and political appointees. I still support him and hope that he accomplishes everything he has promised to deliver. I know that he has stated repeatedly since the day that he came down that golden escalator in 2015 that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. And that's a position that I'm completely in agreement with, by the way, because you cannot have a government like the one in Tehran possess one of the deadliest weapons ever conceived by man because they have shown a propensity and a willingness to stop at nothing to impose their demonic worldview on the entire planet. I just believe that it is time for the other nations of the world to step up and help protect humanity from these evil regimes. I also believe that if it does fall the United States to do this, that we at least follow the Constitution and get Congress to declare war against regimes and nations that have killed and injured so many Americans. Article 2 of the Constitution does grant the commander in chief some latitude in the manner and way in which he can protect Americans. But should we, the people, also demand that our elected representatives do the same? Our elected representatives in the House and the Senate and our Congress have clearly demonstrated since the last declared war of the United States, which would be World War II, ladies and gentlemen, that they will play politics with the U.S. involvement in any conflict, abdicating their authority to declare war through the War Powers Act to the executive branch for the purpose of taking credit in success and passing blame for failure. When General Sherman made the statement, war is hell, during the American Civil War, our political class took that lesson to the level they operate in now. It is sickening that they behave this way. It is my sincere prayer that this attack does bring the mullahs of Iran to the table to negotiate, in good faith, terms for a peaceful coexistence in the Middle East. Past experience has shown that that will not be the case, though. In fact, despite the warnings from President Trump right after the successful mission to destroy Iran's nuclear capability, the demon savages launched more missiles at Israel. The terrorist regime in Tehran is not now, nor has ever been, interested in peaceful coexistence. It is only concerned with world domination. First, through the complete destruction of what they call the people of Saturday, then by taking out the people of Sunday, meaning the Jewish nation of Israel, who worship on the Sabbath Saturdays, and then for the remaining Christian West, the people who worship on Sunday. Just how far they are willing to go, and now that their nuclear capability is destroyed or at least severely degraded, will reveal itself during the coming days and weeks. My advice to every American that listens to this show is to keep your head on a swivel. Be hyper vigilant when you're out in public right now. With what happened on our borders for the previous 4 years under the Biden administration, there is no telling how many terrorists are scattered throughout the Republic right now and who will start their campaign of terror inside our country. There are and always be second and third and fourth order effects to our military interventions overseas. And as has been reported about statements made by members of the Trump administration, I do hope they are effective in removing the threat to our safety and security by these terror cells that are inside the United States of America right now. Time will tell, folks, but I don't believe it will be business as usual for a significant amount of time, both here in the homeland and abroad. Now, let's talk about the recent decision by the Supreme Court that upheld Tennessee's law banning so-called gender-affirming care for minors, which we're going to pick up in the next segment, though. So please stick around. I'll be right back. All right, folks, now we're going to get into the recent decision handed down by the Supreme Court regarding the evil proponents of child mutilation in the state of Tennessee. Also, let's discuss the term we are hearing being bandied about lately, especially by those on the left or communist side of the political spectrum, which would be the phrase political violence. Last Wednesday, the 18th of June, something almost miraculous happened. But as I have cautioned us in the past, if we live by the courts, our republic will die by the courts. Anyway, in the case of the United States versus Scrimeti, which originated from a lawsuit challenging a Tennessee law that banned gender-affirming care for minors, and Scrimeti is the last name of the Tennessee Attorney General. And this case that we're talking about now, it started during the Biden regime, which, of course. Continuing, though, the lawsuit was initially filed by 3 transgender minors and their families, which really means it was initially filed by parents that are suffering from trans housing by proxy and were determined to not only follow through on butchering their children, but ensuring that other trans housing by proxy parents can mutilate their children as well. And in fact, go so far as to push this practice to quote unquote normalize these atrocious acts against the most innocent in our society, our children. I believe I discussed this before. Since these people have already tortured, mutilated, and permanently ruined their children, they will stop at nothing to ensure that other parents do it to their kids as well, under the guise of being called gender affirming care, which really means permanent physical destruction of a human body because of a mental illness. It was also filed by a Memphis-based medical provider, which we'll discuss in a bit how that relates to a novel written by Mary Shelley in 1817 and published in 1818. I'll give you the title of the book later if you haven't guessed it yet. The suit was also brought by that wonderful band of communist activists that claim to be protecting individual liberty, the ACLU, as well as the ACLU of Tennessee, Lambda Legal, and Aiken Group Strauss, Hauer, and Field LLP. Just some of your usual suspects there that are always screeching that they're protecting the rights of the individual, unless that individual is in the womb or is a child victim of trans housing by proxy parents. As I just touched on just a second ago, the defendant in the case was Jonathan Scrimeti, the Attorney General and reporter for Tennessee. His was the primary name, but there were other Tennessee officials mentioned in the lawsuit. And since this lawsuit was filed during the period of time when our White House was occupied by Dr. Jill Biden and her rotting oatmeal for brains puppet husband, old Scranton Joe, the United States intervened to support the plaintiffs in challenging this Tennessee law. The law in question was SB 1, which sponsored by our Tennessee Senate Majority Leader, Jack Johnson, but not for the reasons you think, but for ones which I will discuss in another episode. Trust me, though, old Jack did not introduce this law with the primary intention of protecting children. He did put this legislation forward in the effort to protect something, though. Anyway, Tennessee Senate Bill 1, SB 1, which passed the General Assembly in March of 2023, bans gender affirming medical treatments for minors, including puberty blockers and hormone therapy, when used to treat gender dysphoria, a mental illness, or enable a minor to identify with a gender inconsistent with their sex assigned at birth. The law allows these treatments for other medical purposes, such as precocious puberty, but that's another topic for another day. In United States versus Committee, the United States Supreme Court upheld SB 1 in a 6-3 decision, ruling it doesn't violate the Equal Protection Clause of the 14th Amendment. The majority, led by Chief Justice Roberts, quite the surprise there, though, if you know what I mean, they applied a rational basis review, finding the law classifies based on age and medical use, not sex or transgender status. Most importantly, the majority opinion stated that the law is justified by Tennessee's interest in protecting minors amid medical uncertainty. The dissent, led by none other than the lead black robe cheerleader of the alphabet mafia crowd, Justice Sotomayor, argued the law discriminates based on sex and transgender status, warning heightened scrutiny and harms transgender youth by denying access to critical care. In fact, most of the reporting and headlines across the nation this past week, particularly in the biggest propaganda rags of the commies, always tried to make that point, that this harms transgender youth by denying access to critical care. Because to them, these commies, critical care is chopping off healthy body parts to allow the mentally ill child fit into an image their broken brain has created of their body. The trust the science crowd, they never answer the question of, if these surgeries take place, does it change the person from male to female or vice versa? They choose not to answer that question, especially to the children that are convinced there is something physically and not mentally wrong with them, and convinced of that because of the facilitation by the trans housing by proxy parents in a vast number of these cases. They cannot truly answer that question because it would lead to the proper treatment of their mental illness, not the social justice woke mind virus treatment that results in the permanent sterilization and long-term issues, health issues these children will suffer their entire lives. But once again, folks, I want to caution the audience about this situation because of my rule of thumb. If we live by the courts, we'll die by the courts. We see that playing out all over the nation right now by the judicial system interfering with the duly elected president of the United States in fulfilling his duty as the chief law enforcement officer in our republic. He is enforcing immigration laws currently on the books and is being stopped at every turn by radical judges. Keep in mind, too, the recent Dobbs decision that overturned Roe v. Wade. That abomination of a decision, the quasi-legalized slaughter of millions of innocent children in our nation, was handed down in 1973. It was eventually thrown out by the Dobbs decision in 2022, and for good reason. But it was still overturned, meaning the judicial system could reverse course on this decision in the future as well. The same thing goes as it relates to chattel slavery, the Dred Scott decision in 1857. Folks, the Supreme Court can get it right, they can get it wrong, and they can always reverse course, which has happened many times in our nation's history. We cannot believe the lie that we have to rely on them to save the republic. The truth is, only we can do that, because all power in our constitutional republic resides in we, the people. And we have consistently let ourselves down by electing, or through apathy, allowing to be elected, the wrong people to public office. We have to get over that lie that has been perpetuated by our judicial branch, heck, by the whole of government, since the Marbury versus Madison decision that was handed down in 1803. In that decision, the Supreme Court gave itself, because it isn't granted in Article 3 of the Constitution, they gave themselves the power of judicial review, When the fact of the matter is, they are only granted the authority to decide the cases that appear in front of them, not the authority to say what is or isn't constitutional. That power was reserved for the people and decided every 2, 4, and 6 years. That may seem slow, but the movement of government is supposed to be slow because when it grants itself the ability to make quick decisions, judicial review, liberty is always the first loser. That leads me to the Mary Shelley novel. Have you guessed which one I'm referring to? Yep, Frankenstein. Now, while the actual original novel doesn't have the villagers going after the scientist, the Dr. Victor Frankenstein, but rather the creature he created, there are some adaptations that we, as a society, should have copied when it was discovered that doctors across the country, in fact, across the globe, were performing these Frankenstein-esque surgeries on children. We should have chased these doctors out of town and out of society with pitchforks and torches. These evil doctors, who only see the dollar signs associated with a lifelong patient, should have been made an example out of long ago. And this madness would not be as prevalent as it is today. As a society, as a species, we have failed our children in this respect. I was a guest on a podcast last week where I discussed that a bit more graphically, I might add. We have miserably failed our children in our once great republic. From these horrible surgeries and hormone treatments to what we've been discovering the past few years as it relates to government-run education. And since it is we, the people, who have failed our children, it is up to we, not the executive branch, not the legislative branch, and not the judicial branch of a failed government. It is up to us, we, to fix it. Anything government does can be undone by the next administration and its political party affiliation. We need to fix it by taking on the responsibility for citizenship in a republic as seriously as our founding fathers took it. Sometimes that responsibility to take action may result in something that is labeled as political violence. So stick with me after this upcoming break and I'll explain that a bit more. With that, I'll be right back. Well, folks, I hope that I wasn't too rusty in my return to putting together a solo show. And before I close with God's word, I want to finish my closing thoughts on what I left you with in the last segment. As I mentioned earlier, the term political violence has been a very common use lately, which you may have noticed. More often than not, it is some left-wing talking head or politician decrying political violence in our society today, which is quite weird because, once again, more often than not, it is some left-wing wacko that is participating in or initiating the political violence. It is a rare occasion that you read or see reports about a conservative resorting to violence to solve problems. That is part of the problem as I see it, but you don't have to let me explain. Whenever you read about reports with political violence as the theme, the initial reports are that it was either initiated by A, a white or white adjacent individual, or B, a conservative of any color or race. When the facts are revealed, the opposite is often true. Now, when the initial reports have identified the perpetrator and he or she does not meet one of the two earlier criteria, white or conservative, the label political violence is removed or never even mentioned, and the underlying cause for the individual's violence is either mental illness or that they were radicalized by some other foreign influence. It's done for two reasons. The first being the media and their government handlers want the label of political violence to only be applied to the right side of the political spectrum. The second being they know that applying the label of political violence early will shut down any opposition, much like being labeled a racist worked a few years ago. And since people on the right side of the political spectrum have positions that are based in facts and logic, they don't like to be accused of resorting to political violence to accomplish their goals. Let me ask you this, ladies and gentlemen. Did our founding fathers engage in political violence? You're darn tootin' they did. What was the result of their political violence? Well, we got the least worst system of government ever designed by man. That's what happened. A system of government designed to protect and defend the smallest minority of all, the individual. I believe our own government, the one that started out great, is driving the citizens to the point of political violence, which may be necessary to hit the reset button and restore our national government back to the original design of what was intended. That's just my 2 cents. Before I close out, I also want to remind the audience, stay frosty, stay hyper vigilant over the next few weeks. Iran will respond to our bombing them. That's a given. The demon savages don't respond to facts and logic. They just respond to their mad lust for world domination. In fact, a friend of mine sent me a short clip from Sean Ryan's podcast midday yesterday, where Mr. Ryan's guest was talking about confirmed reports of Iranian terrorists crossing our southern border over the last 4 years with shoulder-fired anti-aircraft missiles. If they can get those across the border, they cross the border with all kinds of other gear that will assist them in their terror attacks within our borders. And since our government, specifically the Congress here, have been cowards for the past 40 plus years and ignored the attacks by Iran and their proxies on American service members and civilians, ignored or facilitated weak presidents like Carter, Obama, and Biden as they sought to appease the mullahs and Tehran with cash and treaties. All of that forced President Trump to take the extraordinary and possibly extra constitutional action over the weekend to destroy Iran's nuclear problem. We now have to be wary at home because of all of that, mainly because our Congress are coward. When the mullahs first attacked the United States in 1979 by taking the hostages, we could have ended it right then and there by a declaration of war against the evil regime and prevented the death and destruction that has occurred over the past 45 years initiated by Iran. But Congress, being the cowards they are, as well as being filled with the self-interest crowd instead of the servant leader crowd they are supposed to be, we are where we are. I'm torn about what to think about the current situation. I've said all along that Iran cannot be allowed to have a nuclear weapon. I've also been of the mindset that our republic cannot get involved in any more Middle East regime change conflicts. But given President Trump's track record of success in these foreign policy actions, especially in that region of the world, as well as his adherence to America First MAGA pragmatism, I have to trust him to figure out how best to get our nation through those two situations that seem to be at loggerheads with each other. What we will encounter over the course of the next few days, weeks, and months is the law of unintended consequences. The second, third, and even fourth order effects of the actions President Trump was forced to take by an ineffective Congress. We shall see, folks. We shall see. In closing, this week's wisdom from God's word comes to us from the book of Jeremiah, chapter 6, verse 13. For from the least to the greatest of them, everyone is greedy for unjust gain, and from prophet to priest, everyone deals falsely. That bit of scripture also applies to our government. They have been greedy for unjust gain for generations now, and we are about to reap the whirlwind for the actions and inactions of our government. Again, folks, please stay frosty when you're out in public. Keep those heads on a swivel and join with me in praying for a peaceful resolution to what is going on in the Middle East. Until next week, ladies and gentlemen, let's take a stand in the arena together. Reveille, it's time to wake up.